Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world where tight corsets, tighter rules, and an obsession with propriety ruled every corner of life. You're not just reading about it, you're living it. Picture this. You wake up on a straw-stuffed mattress in a chilly, candle-lit room. Your toes curl against the freezing floorboards. And you know before you've even sat up that everything you do today must be done with poise, restraint, and the constant fear of being socially inappropriate. Victorian life doesn't ease you in gently. It shakes you awake with a brass handbell and a long list of daily obligations. No phones, no alarms, no snooze buttons, just your maid, or if you're not lucky, your own aching arms, pulling back heavy curtains as grey dawn spills through the frost-flecked windows. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You throw off your woolen coverlet and brace yourself for the first real challenge, getting dressed. But this isn't just about clothes, it's about broadcasting virtue, class, and respectability from head to toe. You don't choose an outfit so much as assemble a message in fabric form. And that message better scream, I am morally upright and moderately wealthy. If you're a woman, your morning begins with a full-length chemise, then drawers, then a corset, then a corset cover, then petticoats, then another petticoat, then a bustle, probably stuffed with horsehair, then the dress, then oversleeves, then gloves, stockings, shoes, and if it's cloudy, a bonnet and veil. And yes, your arms are now about as flexible as a fireplace poker. If you're a man, don't get smug, you'll be wrangling with stiff shirt collars high enough to graze your ears. Detachable cuffs, suspenders, waistcoat, cravat, with precisely arranged folds, and a jacket tailored so tightly it punishes any attempt at spontaneous joy. Historians still argue whether Victorian layering was primarily about modesty, health beliefs, or a general loathing of visible knees, but what's certain is that fashion was moral code in fabric form. Wear too little and you were indecent. Wear too much and you might be putting on airs. And don't even think about going outside until your boots have been shined, your hair brushed into submission, and your appearance assessed by at least one mirror, and maybe a family member trained in scandal prevention. Oh, and remember to avoid anything that could draw attention to your ankles. Ankles are apparently the gateway to moral ruin. Once fully cocooned in cotton, wool, and quiet desperation, you make your way to the washstand. Full baths are a rare ordeal, sometimes weekly, sometimes less, so you make do with a cold splash of water to the face, neck, and hands. Some households believe daily full-body bathing could sap your strength or lead to fevers of the mind. Instead, people relied on perfumes, vinegar rub-downs, and powders to stay fresh. For your teeth, maybe a dab of charcoal on a cloth. Toothbrushes were still a bit rough around the edges, literally. As for deodorant, you might dab on lemon juice, baking soda, or just wear more layers and pray. One lesser-known fringe fact: some Victorians used arsenic wafers to whiten their skin. Yes, arsenic, because being pale wasn't just fashionable, it showed you were rich enough to avoid outdoor labor. Sure, you might die slightly sooner, but at least you do it looking respectably ghostly. Breakfast awaits, but before you can descend the stairs, there's one last ritual: posture check. Shoulders back, spine straight, hands folded. There's no slouching in Victorian society. That would suggest laziness or moral laxity, or worse, a foreign influence. And if you're a child, no reprieve. Children were expected to act like tiny adults. There's even a corset waiting for you by age 7 if you're a girl. What a magical time to be alive. One poor soul described his morning routine in 1857 as a choreographed misery of pins, buckles, buttons, and shame. That might sound dramatic until you try fastening 26 buttons behind your back using only a handheld mirror and sheer willpower. All this before 8 a.m. Still, there's something oddly soothing about the predictability. Every morning, the same layers, the same rituals, the same expectations. It creates a kind of rhythm to life. You know what's required of you. You know what's forbidden. You just need to survive until bedtime without accidentally violating a hatpin protocol. So you draw a deep breath, as deep as your corset allows. Adjust your cravat or your bustle, and prepare to descend into a day carefully crafted from whispered rules. Moral panic, and the ever-present fear of impropriety. Don't trip on the carpet. Falling is undignified. Breakfast, at least, should be comforting, right? Well, sort of. You descend into the dining room, gloved hands primly at your sides. And the first thing you notice isn't the smell of food, it's the silence. If you're in an upper or middle-class home, meals are not noisy affairs filled with cheerful chatter. They are solemn rituals, carried out beneath the soft clink of cutlery and the thunderous weight of correct behavior. You sit when you are told. You unfold your napkin just so, half, never whole, because apparently full lap coverage is a vulgar display of appetite. You wait to be served. You don't reach, you don't ask, you certainly don't help yourself. And if you're a guest, you say, thank you, to everything, including the gruel. Victorian breakfast varies wildly by class. If you're poor, you might be scraping together tea and stale bread, possibly with a smear of drippings if it's payday. But if you're middle or upper class, your plate is a battlefield of boiled meats, kippers, eggs, toast racks, kedgeree, which is, somehow, both fish and rice, kidneys, and the occasional grilled tomato for color. The thing is, you're not really supposed to enjoy any of it too much. You chew delicately, no slurping, no chomping, no licking your fingers. You sip your tea like it's laced with judgment. And heaven forbid you drop a spoon. That sound could bring shame upon the entire household. Historians still argue whether Victorian table manners originated from genuine beliefs in bodily control or from upper-class attempts to distinguish themselves from the uncivilized working classes. Probably both. Either way, it means you spend every bite in a low-grade panic about elbow placement. One curious fringe detail: it was considered indecent to refer to certain foods aloud. The word breast was avoided. Even when discussing chicken, you'd call it white meat. Likewise, leg of lamb might be demoted to lower joint. Your breakfast, then, is not just a meal, it's a linguistic minefield. Even eggs aren't safe. You must tap them gently with the correct utensil. Never crack them in your hand like some kind of animal. And toast, it's served in a rack, not a pile, because piled toast is morally chaotic, apparently. Meanwhile, the room is often frigid. Victorian homes were drafty by design, ventilation was considered healthy, and too much heat could make one languid or prone to sin. So you eat your kidneys and tea in a wool suit or crinoline dress while your nose slowly turns purple. If you're in service, things are even more rigid. Domestic staff often rise at 5 a.m. to prepare everyone else's breakfast and are expected to eat leftovers. Standing up. In the kitchen, they can't talk unless spoken to. They must not be seen in the main dining area. Their presence must be ghost-like and fleeting, like very obedient furniture. Of course, not all homes had servants. In working-class households, the morning might begin with a trip to the communal tap, the fire being lit with yesterday's scraps, and maybe a child tasked with running to the bake shop for day-old bread. You eat quickly, hunched at a shared table, sometimes next to laundry drying on a string across the ceiling. But regardless of wealth, breakfast had one common feature: moral instruction. Newspapers were often read aloud, psalms recited, behavior corrected. Children were expected to learn the proper way to pass the butter, and if they failed, it was corrected immediately. Some families even had etiquette books beside the jam. Remember, everything in Victorian life was supposed to teach you something. And breakfast, too, was a lesson in modesty. self-restraint, and how not to terrify your aunt with excessive marmalade enthusiasm. Still, there's comfort in the ritual. You know what's expected. You know your role. You place your fork with the tines down when finished. You dab your mouth, not wipe. You rise only when the host does. Never before. And if you're lucky enough to be a lady of leisure, breakfast might be served to you in bed around 9 a.m. on a silver tray. But don't get too excited. You still have to sit up straight, eat politely, and look elegant while wondering whether the jam is plum or career-ending. One charming tidbit: toast forks were a thing. Little pronged instruments made just for holding toast over the fire. Some were ornate, monogrammed, or silver-plated, because, naturally, burning your fingers was unladylike. By the time the meal ends, your stomach is warm, your back is sore, and your brain has done mental gymnastics just to avoid using the word sausage. You rise, adjusting your gloves, smoothing your skirts or waistcoat, and prepare to face the day and all its endless expectations. You haven't even made it to the front door yet, and you're already exhausted. But chin up, there's nothing more Victorian than soldiering on in dignified silence, preferably while digesting a hard-boiled egg and reflecting on your moral failings. Time to get dressed, again. Yes, what you put on after breakfast is different from what you wore to breakfast. Especially if you plan to leave the house. Because in Victorian society, your clothing isn't just fashion. It's a full-body resume, spiritual report card, and personal branding exercise rolled into one. Getting it wrong, social death. So you head to your wardrobe, or if you're a servant, the hook behind the door, and begin the delicate process of dressing according to your class. Gender, the hour of day, the weather, and whether or not someone might see your ankles. If you're a middle or upper class woman, the number of outfit changes required per day would rival a Broadway lead. Morning dress, walking dress, visiting dress, tea gown, dinner gown, and, of course, morning dress, because Victorians are always either grieving or preparing to grieve. Your daytime outfit begins with the basics: corset, chemise, drawers, layers of petticoats. Yes, still, but now, you must choose a dress with a bodice style appropriate to both the time of day and your marital status. Low neckline, only acceptable after 6 p.m. unless you're a scandalous French opera singer or accidentally French in general. Sleeves, full length if you're married, slightly puffed for younger ladies. Cap sleeves, only if you're under 18 and playing piano. Historians still argue whether these strict garment rules were expressions of modesty, class distinction, or pure collective madness. And then there are your gloves. You must wear gloves outdoors, even in sweltering heat. Removing gloves in public is nearly indecent unless you're eating. And even then, it must be done discreetly and with purpose. Color is another coded language. Deep plum suggests mourning. Pale blue, modesty and sweetness. Scarlet, best avoided unless you want whispers. And white, oh, white is the domain of purity, weddings, and seasonal respiratory infections. Fringe fact: some etiquette guides advised women to dress 2 degrees below their station to avoid being seen as vulgar. So if you're middle class, try to look modestly plain. If you're rich, just look slightly less rich. It's a delicate dance of pretense and downplaying. Now let's say you're a man. You're not off the hook either. Your morning attire must be crisp and restrained. Tailcoats, waistcoats, striped trousers, and neckties all tailored within an inch of your ability to breathe. Top hats are required outdoors for most gentlemen, but not indoors. Bowler hats are for working men and daring trendsetters. But wear one to a garden party and someone's monocle might pop off in protest. The phrase, dressing down, doesn't exist yet. You either dress correctly, or you don't get invited back. If you work in a respectable trade, banking, law, publishing, you wear somber colors. Black, gray, navy. You must radiate moral seriousness and an almost supernatural ability to avoid mustard stains. Shoes, polished to a mirror shine. Naturally, some wealthier Victorians had servants whose sole job was to clean and press boots. which sounds absurd until you remember how much grime Victorian streets contained. Horse droppings, coal dust, and mysterious puddles were just part of the walking experience. If you're poor or working class, things look different. You likely own just one or two outfits. Your work clothes are patched, practical, and stiff from soap and wear. They're kept as clean as possible, because even the working classes are judged by appearances. In fact, there's a whole visual vocabulary for spotting someone's status from across the street. Frayed cuffs, working man, too bright colors, probably nouveau riche or a music hall performer. Dusty lace, a governess, wrinkled apron, maid, wrong hat shape, foreign, or worse, unmarried and not trying hard enough. You once heard of a woman turned away from a tea salon because her buttons were mismatched. Another was mistaken for a housekeeper because her sleeves were slightly too narrow. Every stitch matters. By mid-morning, you're finally dressed properly, which means your collar is cutting off circulation and you can hear your corset boning creak when you turn. But you feel secure, clothed not just in fabric, but in expectations. One unusual fashion trend you secretly enjoy: chatelaines, worn by many women of the household. They're decorative belt clips that hang useful tools like scissors, watches, thimbles, or tiny notebooks. It's basically a fashionable utility belt, Victorian style, and no one questions it, because it's productive. It's also very shiny, and a nice distraction from your daily fear of not matching your umbrella to your gloves. Your look complete. You glance in the mirror, straighten your lapel, smooth your skirt, maybe pinch your cheeks for a little color, though not too much, lest someone mistake you for an actress. Out the door you go, dressed like a moral statement with legs. You survived the dressing gauntlet. For now, but don't get too comfortable. There's an entirely different outfit waiting for your afternoon promenade, and you'd better hope you remember which bonnet goes with your walking shoes. Because in the Victorian world, your clothes don't just make the M. You step outside at last, dressed like a period drama extra, and immediately remember, even the act of walking has rules now. Strolling down a Victorian street isn't just a way to get from one place to another, it's a social performance. Every movement you make, every glance you give or don't give, says something about who you are, how respectable your upbringing was, and whether you can be trusted near anyone's daughter. So you don't stride, you glide. It's called promenading, and it's part light exercise, part mating ritual, part competitive etiquette showcase. You move slowly, not because you're lazy, but because fast walking suggests either vulgar enthusiasm or indigestion. Neither is acceptable. You keep your hands to yourself. Your head is held high. Your eyes scan gently, but not too much. If you look around too eagerly, people might think you're nosy, or worse, curious. Historians still argue whether this public self-policing was about reinforcing class hierarchy or maintaining gender roles in a rapidly urbanizing society. Either way, walking becomes a very, very tense affair. And let's not forget your accessories. You, dear lady, have a parasol, not for sun protection exactly, but as a prop to shield your face at just the right angle. It must be held a certain way, twirled just so. One wrong jab and you've committed social assault. If you're a gentleman, you carry a cane, not because you need support, but because it gives your hands something to do besides accidentally looking idle. Which was dangerously close to appearing loose. You walk clockwise through the park. Yes, really, promenades had designated directions. Violate them and expect frowns from passing matrons or a discreet whisper from your aunt. Parks like London's Hyde Park had entire loops called the Ladies' Mile, where women of a certain class could be admired from a chaste distance. It was, essentially, an open-air display case for future wives. One quirky tidbit: some etiquette books warned that walking with both hands in your pockets would invite suspicion of criminal intent. So even your pockets had rules. As you stroll, you pass other people also pretending not to judge you. You nod at acquaintances. Do not greet strangers unless formally introduced, otherwise, you might be mistaken for someone in trade. or even worse, a foreigner. The sidewalks are uneven. Horse droppings are abundant. You step carefully, always watching where your boots fall, but not so obviously that you appear fussy. There's an art to noticing manure without noticing it. A breeze picks up and catches your hat ribbon. Instinctively, you raise a gloved hand to catch it, and then freeze, realizing you just lifted your elbow above shoulder height. Scandalous. You adjust quickly, pretend to examine a storefront window, and carry on as if nothing happened. Smooth. For women, walking alone can be loaded with implications. A lady out without an escort might be mistaken for a governess, or worse, a woman of public availability. That's why you often see 2 or more women together, or a woman accompanied by a maid or chaperone, even if all they're doing is walking to the milliner. If you're working class, walking is different again. It's purposeful, brisk, sometimes shared with carts and street vendors, but still full of judgment. Women who walk too fast are considered brash. Men who walk too slowly are lazy or drunk. It's a minefield of moral assumptions. And everyone's watching. You pass a policeman in his high-collared uniform. He nods, barely, and you respond with a slight tip of your head. Nothing more. Any additional interaction would be strange unless you've just been pickpocketed or witnessed a chimney sweep duel. Which, by the way, is a real thing. Chimney sweeps occasionally fought over territories. Very Dickensian, very sooty. Back on your route, you approach a street crossing. There are no stoplights. Those won't arrive until the 20th century. Instead, you time your crossing between carriages, carts, cyclists, and the occasional dangerously loose goose. And if you're lucky, a crossing sweeper might be there. A poor child whose job is to clear manure with a broom so your boots stay clean. Of course, you'll need to tip him, but only a penny, and with decorum. One detail you find comforting: many Victorian streets are lined with trees or iron fences, visual order imposed on a chaotic world. It helps soothe your nerves as you pass gossiping maids, market stalls with suspiciously loud salesmen, and small boys hurling apples at lampposts. Boys will be boys, even in a corseted society. By now, you've circled the square. You've been seen, appropriately. You haven't smiled too much, tripped, spoken to anyone improper, or revealed your ankles. This counts as a successful outing. It's strange, though, beneath all the rules, there's something oddly peaceful about the predictability. When everything is structured, even walking, there's a quiet rhythm to life. You don't have to make many choices. You just have to know the rules, and follow them. Every step, every glance, every stitch of your clothing tells the world, I belong here. And in a society that fears chaos more than anything else, that's perhaps the greatest comfort of all. Back from your carefully measured walk, you've earned the dubious reward of more etiquette. It's calling hours now, the oddly militarized version of socializing that defines upper and middle class Victorian life. Paying a call isn't casual. It's not friendly. It's certainly not spontaneous. It's a regulated dance of who visits whom, when, how long they stay, and, most importantly, what they leave behind. You can't just drop by someone's home. That would be horrifying. No. First you send a calling card, a small, stiff rectangle embossed with your name, perhaps adorned with a modest flourish or floral border. Think of it as a glorified business card, except it determines whether you'll ever be invited back for cake. You arrive at your acquaintance's door, never a friend. You don't admit to having those. Hand your card to the maid. And wait, the mistress of the house has a choice. Accept your visit or pretend she's not home. If she accepts, you'll be ushered into the drawing room. If not, well, your card is quietly placed in a tray alongside the dreams of dozens of other hopeful social climbers. Historians still debate whether the rigid calling system was about preserving social order or just giving people a way to avoid each other politely. Either way, it works. Everyone knows their place, and nobody is forced to pretend they like each other for too long. Once inside, the rules tighten. If you're the visitor, you remove your gloves, but not your hat, unless you're staying more than 15 minutes. Any longer than that and your host might think you're emotionally unstable. Or worse. From Birmingham. Conversation must be light. The weather. A book neither of you actually read. That charming parson with the unfortunate laugh. Anything too personal, forbidden. Anything too cheerful, suspicious. Your body language must signal complete interest while also maintaining polite distance. You sit upright but relaxed. You keep both feet on the floor. You do not cross your legs unless you want to be talked about at the next dinner party. If you're the host, your task is even harder. You must remember the name of your guest's third cousin's poodle and offer tea with precisely the right number of biscuits. Too few, and you seem cheap. Too many, and you appear desperate. One delightfully fringe detail: there were even different shaped trays for displaying calling cards. Oval trays were for family. Square ones for casual acquaintances. If your card ended up in the wrong tray, social panic. The act of returning a visit must be done within 2 weeks. If you wait longer, the other person might assume you've died, been imprisoned, or worse, decided to associate with Methodists. For unmarried women, paying calls alone was frowned upon. You usually went with a chaperone, or at the very least, an older female relative with a squint and a fondness for lemon drops. Every movement, every gesture, is a layer of coded communication. And you are fluent, or pretending to be. Even how you leave matters. Rise slowly, make gentle eye contact, express thanks but not too much. Do not curtsy indoors, unless you're visiting someone titled. In which case there's an entire separate chapter of rules involving neck angles and number of knee bends. You step back onto the street and breathe. You were only in there for 12 minutes. And yet you feel like you just sat for the bar exam in gloves. But you did well. You didn't spill anything. You remembered to refer to the cat as Her Ladyship. You pronounced bouquet the English way. You lived to visit another day. Back home, you examine your own calling tray. 2 new cards. One from Mrs. Haraway, pleasant, if slightly judgmental, and one from Miss Chalmers, who is very nice but has the misfortune of being new money. What do? You return both calls, of course, but at slightly different times, and with different dress levels, to convey subtle messages about your standing and availability. It's like matchmaking, if matchmaking came with teaspoons and battle strategy. And if you're poor, calling cards are not your problem. Your socializing involves shouting across alleyways or leaning out windows with laundry in one hand and gossip in the other. But even in those circles, there are rules. Who sits on which stoop? Who brings what to Sunday stew? Who speaks first? The difference is just a matter of starch and printing quality. Still, for the classes that depend on it, the calling ritual is everything. You build reputations one rectangle at a time. You climb ladders with polite paper. You measure social victories in returned visits and faint compliments about your parlor curtains. And it's exhausting, but it's also safe. In a strange way, everyone knows what to expect. Nobody overstays. Nobody overshares. There are boundaries, frameworks, scripts. And in a world where scandal can bloom from a smudged teacup or a mismatched hatpin, a little paper rectangle feels like the only shield you've got. You've paid your calls, curtsied just the right amount, and survived 4 miniature fruitcakes, all without accidentally revealing a personal opinion. Bravo. Now, if you're unmarried and of age, it's time to do what every respectable Victorian is expected to do, court. But don't get excited. This isn't about butterflies or moonlight or heart-throbbing declarations. Victorian courtship is basically like applying for a mortgage, with your parents acting as both bank and security guard. Let's start with the obvious. You're not alone. Never alone, not even in the same room as someone you're interested in unless someone older, sterner, and armed with a crochet project is also there, watching like a hawk who's seen things. You meet your potential suitor at a garden party or a family friend's dinner, not a pub. Not the market, and certainly not just walking down the street. Unchaperoned meetings between unmarried people are forbidden unless you're related or being robbed. The process begins with conversation, innocent, indirect, and filled with thrilling topics like the weather in Bath. your uncle's dog, or the safe parts of the latest sermon. Eye contact is allowed, but sparingly. Think, interested goldfish, not passionate soul mirror. If you're a man, your role is to prove you have money, prospects, and a steady hand for fencing or accounting. If you're a woman, your role is to appear pleasant, musically capable, and like you've never had indigestion in your life. Historians still argue whether courtship rules were designed to protect young women from scandal or to enforce strict property arrangements disguised as love. The answer, naturally, is yes. Fringe fact: in some circles, men were allowed to offer their arm during a walk only after they'd been formally introduced. And only if the terrain was uneven. So unless you're strolling through a rockslide, your elbow stays lonely. As courtship progresses, your interactions might include supervised walks, heavily monitored dances, and the occasional exchange of letters. These letters, by the way, will be read by mothers, sisters, aunts, possibly even the postman, so you keep it poetic, respectful, and absolutely not suggestive. If you say, "You looked radiant last Tuesday," someone somewhere will clutch their pearls. You might be allowed to send flowers, but even the type of flower matters. Violets, modest affection; red roses, bold, almost improper; yellow, a subtle, "I'm interested but also possibly unwell." Florists must have made a fortune decoding romance for the verbally stifled. Your chaperone is always nearby, often knitting, but her ears are sharper than her needles. One cough from her and your suitor knows to change the topic from poetry to potatoes. And if he overstays his welcome by even 5 minutes, he's met with the dreaded phrase, "Miss Clara must rest now." You're never alone, never unsupervised, never allowed to laugh too hard, lean too close, or show your wrist more than briefly. Every meeting is a resume review. Every glance a microcalculation of marital viability. And yet, you learn to speak through nuance. A slightly longer glance, a pause before sipping tea, a piano duet where your hands hover just near enough to thrill without scandal. In a way, it's more intense than any modern romance. Because everything is so implied, so delicately encoded, that even the smallest gesture feels monumental. Eventually, if things go well, the gentleman might approach your father with a formal proposal of courtship. Not marriage, courtship, the pre-engagement to the engagement. Just in case someone gets cold feet or develops a sudden fondness for the vicar's daughter instead. And if your family approves, then, congratulations, you may now sit closer on the sofa, maybe even walk in the park without a third wheel. It's all very thrilling. Of course, there are rules for ending things. 2. If you or your suitor decides to withdraw, it must be done with maximum grace and minimum detail. The engagement has been broken, is the official line. No follow-up allowed. Gossip will still bloom, of course. But at least you preserved appearances. But if, heaven forbid, a couple is discovered to have met alone, without a chaperone, the consequences could be dramatic. In some cases, the man was pressured to propose immediately to preserve the lady's honor. Imagine being legally tied to someone because you made eye contact for too long behind a hedge. And if the woman was blamed, which she almost always was, her reputation could suffer permanently. She might be labeled forward, or worse, romantic, a truly damning word in a society that preferred its emotions carefully pressed between book pages. One charming little tradition, the love token. If the relationship was progressing, the lady might give her suitor a lock of her hair, snipped discreetly and coiled into a brooch or locket. Some locks were even braided into elaborate designs and framed. Slightly creepy, yes. Deeply sentimental, also yes. By the end of a successful courtship, you haven't just found a spouse. You've demonstrated to your entire social circle that you understand the rules, that you are, in every sense, correct. And that's the real goal of Victorian love. So you continue your polite, gloved dance, one piano recital at a time, one walk around the garden, one poem, carefully censored. It's slow, restrained, exhausting, but if you're lucky, very lucky, underneath all that lace, propriety, and chaperone sighing, you might just find someone who can glance at you across the room and make your whole world tilt. Quietly, of course, with permission. After the delicate ballet of courtship, you find yourself back where Victorian life truly thrives, indoors, where every conversation is a test, and every cushion has social consequences. Welcome to the drawing room. This is the nerve center of polite society, the room where you gather to exchange ideas, observe etiquette, and fight subtle wars of status armed only with teaspoons and passive-aggressive embroidery. You don't come here to relax. You come here to be judged. You sit on the edge of a well-upholstered chair, never a sofa. Unless you've been invited. Sofas are for family, or for very old people, or for the daring sort of aunt who once met Charles Dickens and isn't afraid to mention it. If you're hosting, you must play the perfect conductor, gently cueing the tea, steering conversation topics, laughing politely at Colonel Montague's terrible joke about beetroot. The room itself is a performance, layered with antimacassars, those little lace doilies. Decorative china no one's allowed to touch. And so many ferns it's a wonder anyone breathes. Historians still argue whether the drawing room evolved as a purely feminine sphere or as a broader cultural escape hatch from the grimness of Victorian street life. Either way, once you're in it, you're playing a role, and the lines are strict. You don't talk about religion, unless everyone's already aligned. You don't talk politics, unless you're a man, and everyone else is too. You don't talk about illness, labor, finances, death, romance, bodily functions, or anything remotely interesting. That rules out about 97% of known conversation. You may discuss the weather, recent church sermons, books by authors who are safely dead, the garden, cats, provided the cat is not present. There is a proper tone for all of this, light, non-committal, never too excited. If someone raises their voice or gestures too widely, the tea might curdle in shock. You must speak in full sentences. Contractions are frowned upon. Slang is banned. And for the love of Queen Victoria, never use the word leg. Not even in reference to furniture. You say limb or lower portion. It's ridiculous. It's real. One fringe fact: some Victorian households actually kept a list of pre-approved topics and circulated them before a gathering. Imagine arriving and being handed a card that says, "Acceptable subjects today, Madeira cake, daffodils, Prince Albert's latest waistcoat." You sip your tea, not slurp. You stir without clinking. Your saucer stays with you, hovering under the cup like a lifeboat. If you're offered sugar, you accept with grace. If you're offered a second biscuit, decline once, then accept, but never the third. The third is the biscuit of the desperate. And speaking of desperation, watch your conversation. You must participate, but not dominate. Listen attentively, but not too attentively. Laugh gently. Offer anecdotes only if they're inoffensive, brief, and, ideally, slightly boring. That's the sweet spot. If someone mentions a cousin with an artistic temperament, you know to change the subject. This is code for scandal. If someone says a friend has retired to the seaside for her health, that's often Victorian for nervous breakdown. And if someone calls a woman clever, there's a decent chance it's not a compliment. Meanwhile, embroidery is a respectable defense against awkward silence. You may stitch in silence. You may even sigh once, but only if it's related to the pattern, not your emotional state. And men, you must tread even more carefully. If you're not discussing books, taxes, or whether the local squire's barn was adequately roofed, you're probably veering off course. One gentleman famously scandalized a drawing room by describing a partridge hunt in too much detail. Bloodless, of course, but still. Feathers were ruffled. Eventually, the piano makes its appearance. If you're a young woman, you are expected to play something light, not too complicated, not too expressive. Chopin is risky, Schubert is safe, Beethoven is fine if you skip the emotional parts. And whatever you do not play anything foreign sounding. That leads to awkward silence and someone nervously sipping an empty teacup. Applause must be minimal. A gentle nod will do. Anything more enthusiastic would seem French. You play, you curtsy, you return to your seat without breaking eye contact with anyone over 60. One curious tradition. If a gentleman compliments your playing, it's polite to deflect. "Oh, I'm barely passable, the piano plays itself." Really, confidence is viewed with suspicion, unless you're a man over 40 and quoting Horace. At last, the drawing room begins to empty. Guests rise, thank the host, and exit in the order of their social rank. Yes, even departures are hierarchical. You remain, exhaling slowly. Your face aches from smiling politely. Your spine is a question mark from perfect posture. Your tea is cold and you never even bit the second biscuit. And yet, somehow, you did it. You navigated the conversational maze. You dropped not a single scandalous phrase. You even remembered not to say pants. There, trousers, pants, means underwear, and that's a social felony. There's a kind of magic in the absurdity of it all. A tightrope walk of propriety and performance where everyone knows the rules. Even if they're ridiculous. Because drawing rooms aren't about comfort or connection, they're about keeping the peace. Keeping up appearances. And above all, keeping yourself in check. So you fluff the cushions, reposition the ferns, and prepare to do it all again next Thursday. Same tea. Same talk. Same terrifying silence. Because in the Victorian world, even sitting still and chatting is an Olympic sport in social survival. And now, let's talk about work. Or rather, let's talk about how you're supposed to pretend it doesn't exist, at least if you're from the upper classes. If you're fortunate enough to be genteel, the kind of Victorian who owns porcelain dog figurines and thinks of trade as a bit of a character flaw, then employment is a four-letter word spelled disgrace. A gentleman does not work. A lady most certainly does not work. And if either one does, the less said about it, the better. Unless, of course, you're doing charitable work, preferably something vague involving pamphlets, orphans, and an annual bake sale in support of the morally hygienic. That's allowed, encouraged, even. Just don't expect anyone to call it actual work. But let's say you aren't one of the idle rich. Let's say you're a governess. You, dear listener, are now the human equivalent of a decorative lamp, always present, rarely noticed, and expected to cast just enough moral light without dazzling the family too much. You live in the house, but you're not family. You eat with the children, but you're not staff. You exist in a strange Victorian purgatory of polite invisibility. Your days start early, with the children's Latin, followed by moral instruction, watercolors, and relentless piano scales. You never raise your voice. You never relax your spine. You never, ever, have an opinion. The children may forget your name. The parents might call you Miss whatever her face. But you keep going, because it's your duty, and also because there are absolutely no other respectable jobs for educated women. Historians still argue whether the governess role empowered women through independence or merely trapped them in genteel servitude with a smile. Most agree it was a bit of both, freedom in a cage, lined with taffeta and tact. Meanwhile, if you're a man with less than genteel lineage, you might find yourself in banking, law, or the clergy, so long as you wear the right hat and don't mention that your grandfather sold buttons. Banking, of course, is the great socially acceptable money business. You can work in a bank and still hold your head high at a dinner party, so long as your shirt cuffs are clean and your opinions are safely moderate. You spend your days surrounded by ledgers, quills, and exactly one plant on your desk that never seems to grow. In fact, Victorian banks were famously overstaffed, with entire departments devoted to just rewriting numbers in better handwriting. One bank had a rule that any blot on a ledger was punishable by salary reduction. Yes, a salary deduction. For ink. Victorians didn't mess around. And if you're a clergyman, well, you're employed, but in the way that doesn't really count as work. You preach, you lead prayers, you organize church bazaars and moderate heated arguments about the placement of flower arrangements. Your job is part divine, parts social glue, and entirely unpaid unless you have a wealthy patron. Fortunately, parishioners are expected to feed you at regular intervals. A clergyman's diet is often 40% fruitcake, 30% pickled things, and 30% sitting politely with indigestion. But let's not forget the workers who really keep society running. The maids, the butlers, the laundresses, the gardeners who never speak and mysteriously vanish before tea. These people work hard, but the whole point of Victorian class etiquette is that they do it quietly, invisibly, and preferably through a system of pulleys, bells, and polished shoes that appear by magic. One fringe tidbit: some wealthy households actually had rules requiring servants to rotate which staircase they used, depending on the day of the week, to reduce the chance of them being seen. The horror. And then there's the laundry. You've never known hard work until you've watched someone scrub linen by hand with lye soap and boiling water. Laundry days could last 3 days. Clothes had to be boiled, beaten, wrung out, dried, starched, ironed with solid metal blocks heated in fires, folded perfectly, and then stored in camphor to avoid moths. By the end, your hands would look like a raisin's great-grandmother. For working-class women, employment meant sewing, cleaning, child-minding, or if you were daring, shop clerking. One job, called a knocker-upper, involved walking the streets before dawn and tapping on bedroom windows with a long pole to wake people up for work. And no, nobody woke 'em up. That's just Victorian irony. If you're a man, industrial jobs abound: coal mining, factory spinning, dock hauling. You come home covered in soot, missing a button or two, and you're still expected to tip your hat and say good evening with civility. Historians still debate whether the rise of industry gave workers more autonomy or just new kinds of hardship. It's true that wages slowly improved, but so did injuries, respiratory disease, and something called phossy jaw, which came from working with phosphorus in match factories and made your face glow in the dark. Yes, glow, like a tragic nightlight. And let's not forget clerks, endless rows of young men hunched over desks, copying ledgers until their handwriting looked like printed type. Your job is dull, your pay is tiny, your boss is named Mr. Farnsworth and has exactly 2 facial expressions, stern and disappointed. But it's honest work, and there's a quiet pride in that. Still, whether you're managing finances or mending bloomers, the Victorian obsession with order and hierarchy never lets up. Your job defines you, but only as far as society allows. You can climb a little, maybe, but never too fast, and certainly not while whistling. So you keep your head down, iron your cuffs, and remember, to survive Victorian employment, the trick is not to stand out. Just blend into the wallpaper, or the ledges, or the laundry pile. After all, being visible might mean being judged. And no one wants that. Not in a world where even your coal smudge could become a character flaw. Dinner time in Victorian society isn't just a meal. Oh no, it's a choreographed performance, a test of poise, palate, and the ability to smile politely through hours of mild discomfort and strong-smelling meats. You're not just eating, you're surviving a social gauntlet disguised as roast duck and molded jelly. First, you must dress, not casually, not even nice enough. You must transform. For men, that means crisp shirts, cravats tight enough to limit oxygen, and waistcoats that hint at affluence without screaming for attention. For women, it's corsets cinched tighter than your emotional availability, gloves you can't remove until someone gives you permission, and gowns heavy enough to require their own transportation plan. Arriving at a dinner party is a ritual in itself. You enter precisely on time, not early, because that's rude, and not late, because that's fatal. You greet the host with a compliment that sounds effortless but took you 2 days to rehearse. You avoid mentioning weather unless the Queen has made it rain herself. Then comes the seating. Oh, the seating. Victorians treat dinner party seating arrangements like royal lineage spreadsheets. The host spends hours, or has their butler spend hours, matching social ranks, marriage status, and conversational compatibility. If you sit next to someone of lower class than yourself, that's a silent scandal. If you're that lower class person, welcome to 2 hours of smiling through forced invisibility. The actual meal, it's long. You begin with soup, consommé, maybe, or something mysteriously grayish, and you must remember not to blow on it. Blowing is for peasants. Instead, you swirl, gently, clockwise. You're served by footmen who glide like ghosts and never make eye contact. Each course is removed silently, in a well-rehearsed ballet of silver trays and practiced indifference. The food itself ranges from sublime to questionable. You might enjoy tender roast pheasant with thyme, or you might be facing calf's head molded in aspic, which is exactly as delightful as it sounds. Double-faced duck, that's not a typo. It's a dish made by folding a duck's skin over stuffing and sewing it shut again. Taxidermy with seasoning. There's one dish called whitebait, which is just deep-fried tiny fish, heads and all. You're supposed to eat them whole, with dignity, and God help you if you don't know which fork to use. Victorian place settings are warfare in silver. You face an army of utensils, each with its own purpose, moral implication, and deeply buried judgment. A fish fork, a game fork, a dessert spoon that looks suspiciously like your soup spoon but apparently isn't. Historians still argue whether the correct fish knife shape evolved for practical reasons or simply to weed out social imposters. While you navigate your cutlery, conversation bubbles around you, but carefully. You may discuss the weather, the opera, botany, or local architecture. You may not mention illness, politics, money, childbirth, or even trousers. Some hostesses use the word unmentionables for furniture legs. Yes, furniture. One fringe tidbit: some hosts covered their piano legs with little lace pantalettes because bare wood was too scandalous. Let that sink in while you gnaw discreetly on a lamb shank. Also, chewing. You must do it silently, and ideally invisibly. The ideal Victorian eater doesn't chew, food simply disappears. If you must sip, do so quietly. If you must cough, excuse yourself and relocate to a hallway for no less than 15 minutes. Midway through, you're offered wine. Accepting is fine. Declining is suspect. Drinking too much is ruinous. Drinking too little, well, what are you hiding? Dessert arrives 3 hours later. A tower of jelly, perhaps, or an entire swan-shaped marzipan sculpture no one dares to eat. By now your feet have gone numb, and the cravat has fused to your spine. But you nod and smile and say things like, exquisite texture, even if you're talking about the napkin. After dessert, the men and women separate. Men retire to the drawing room to drink brandy and discuss topics like investments or imperial expansion while pretending not to fall asleep. Women drift into another parlor to sip weak tea and exchange veiled gossip cloaked in euphemism. A lady might say, she's very fond of the seaside, which means, she's pregnant and no one's talking about it. Victorian society runs on double-speak and good posture. And remember, if you're hosting, the pressure is worse. Every guest must be perfectly matched, fed, and flattered. The candles must burn evenly. The napkins must be folded into swans, not peacocks. You think I'm joking? I am not. One hostess famously lost her social standing after a soup course was served lukewarm. Not cold, not missing, just slightly off temperature. She was never invited to the Duchess's garden party again. You see, in the Victorian world, meals are more than meals. They are status displays, power negotiations, and endurance tests, served with gravy. They're your chance to ascend in society, or trip over a chair and descend rapidly. And so, you finish your 5th course. You dab your lips with a napkin. You praise the lemon custard as unexpectedly harmonious. And you wonder, quietly, if anyone in history has ever longed for toast and pajamas this badly. Then you rise, as gracefully as possible in layers of fabric and indigestion, and prepare to repeat this dance next week, or tomorrow, because in the Victorian world, you don't eat to live, you dine to survive. Let's talk about hygiene in the Victorian era, which is to say, let's gently peel back the layers of lavender water. coal dust, and social shame that make up the very peculiar relationship Victorians had with cleanliness. First, don't get too excited. There is no daily hot shower. There's barely a weekly bath. You begin your day not by turning on the tap, but by ringing for a servant to carry up a basin of lukewarm water. If you're lucky, that water has seen less than 3 uses already. You splash it onto your face using a monogrammed flannel. More for ritual than results. Toothpaste, sort of. It's chalky, salty, and might contain pulverized cuttlefish. Actual full-body bathing is rare and controversial. A warm soak in a tub might happen once a week. If that, for most people, it's more like once a month. Timed carefully with the lunar cycle or the housekeeper's emotional stability. The idea of washing too often was viewed with deep suspicion. Some even believed that frequent baths could weaken the body's natural defenses. Historians still argue whether this was due to medical ignorance or just a clever excuse to avoid freezing in cold houses. If you're a woman, you've also got about 15 pounds of hair to manage, real hair. That is, plus possibly some clip-on contributions. Washing it might take an entire day, plus a coal stove, a tin of goose fat, and at least 2 other people. More commonly, you sprinkle it with lavender powder and brush it. 100 strokes every single day. This isn't just grooming, it's an Olympic event. Men aren't exempt. They apply macassar oil to their hair to keep it shiny and in place. That stuff is so greasy, it permanently stains furniture, hence the invention of the antimacassar. Those little doilies still haunting armchairs today. As for undergarments, cleanliness comes with compromise. You wear layers of them. Remember, so you don't wash your outer clothes often. You change the layers closest to your skin, chemises, drawers, undershirts, which are boiled to a level of violence that would terrify modern fabrics. Soap is lye-based, rough as sandpaper, and smells faintly of industrial despair. But what about the less decorative parts of hygiene? Well, the chamber pot sits under your bed like a porcelain secret. If you wake in the night, you use it, quietly, discreetly. Then the servants collect it in the morning along with 14 others and hope you didn't eat anything too adventurous the night before. Urban homes sometimes have indoor plumbing, sort of. The water closet, or WC, is a marvel of wooden seats and unreliable flushing. You don't flush things casually. That's wasteful, or revolutionary. Toilet paper doesn't exist as you know it. Some households use soft cloth squares to be boiled and reused. Others, less luxuriously, offer old newspaper. Either way, your reading material pulls double duty. Perfume becomes a coping mechanism. Everyone wears it. You dab it behind your ears, on your gloves, in your handkerchief. Some carry little vinaigrettes, tiny vials of vinegar and herbs, to sniff discreetly when city streets become too much to bear. And they do. Between horse dung, smoke, and rotting food, the air itself feels like a challenge. One fringe trick: some ladies carried oranges studded with cloves, portable potpourri to help mask the ambient horror. Victorian cities aren't exactly paragons of sanitation. Raw sewage flows through open gutters in poorer areas. Rubbish is collected erratically. Rats are abundant. You, a refined person, avoid eye contact with the rats. Still, reformers are trying. The Public Health Acts bring in regulations about clean water and sewer systems. Soap becomes more affordable. Bathhouses open in working-class neighborhoods. But habits lag behind infrastructure. The general vibe is, don't bathe too often, but to carry a lace handkerchief infused with rose oil just in case someone near you does. One particular hygiene quirk: armpit hair. In women, it was rarely discussed but usually left alone. Shaving wasn't a thing until much later. And even then, it started more as a marketing ploy than a moral necessity. In men, shaving faces was standard, if you could afford a decent razor and had steady hands. Otherwise, you paid a barber who may or may not also extract teeth and apply leeches. And let's not forget oral hygiene. Toothbrushes exist, usually made from boar bristles and bone handles. They are surprisingly beautiful, and deeply unpleasant. Tooth powders often contain charcoal, salt, or chalk. The goal is to scrape, not pamper. Cavities. You either ignore them or have the offending tooth yanked in what can only be described as a scream-forward procedure. On a fringe note, some Victorians believed in cleansing the blood through leeches, cupping, or home remedies like sulfur lozenges. These had no measurable effect except to make you smell faintly like a matchstick. By now, you may be wondering, did anyone actually feel clean? No, not really, but they felt virtuous. Cleanliness wasn't about comfort, it was a moral signifier. To be neat and tidy was to be respectable. To stink too boldly was to slide toward sin. Or worse, social rejection. Even your posture is part of hygiene. You're expected to sit straight, walk tall, and avoid slouching, because a crooked spine suggests a crooked soul. At least, that's what your aunt with the tightest corset and the driest sponge bath insists. And so you make do. You sponge yourself with cold water, rub your face with a cloth that smells like last Thursday's tea, and powder your underarms with violet talc. You brush your hair until your shoulder aches and pray that your neighbor doesn't lean in too close during dinner. Because in Victorian society, cleanliness isn't about feeling fresh, it's about maintaining appearances. You must look as if you bathe. You must smell as if you sparkle. But you must never, ever seem obsessed with washing. That, after all, would be vulgar. You wake to the slow tolling of distant church bells, muffled slightly by the morning fog. Sunday has arrived, and with it, the full, unyielding weight of Victorian piety. No excuses. You're going to church twice. The first trip is early, maybe 8 a.m., depending on your denomination. You dress in your Sunday best, which, if you're a woman, means yards of petticoats, a high-necked gown, gloves, a bonnet, and that one lace shawl that doesn't quite match but is close enough. Men, meanwhile, endure stiff collars that pinch like moral disapproval. The streets are oddly silent as you make your way to the church. No street vendors, no carts, no laughter. It's like the entire city has been told to hush. Even the horses seem to clop more respectfully. Once inside, you slide into a hard wooden pew, careful not to make the seat creak. Posture is everything. No leaning, no slumping. Victorian society believed slouching during a sermon was basically an invitation for eternal damnation, or worse. A visit from your grandmother's judgmental friend. The air smells of varnished wood and damp wool. You open your prayer book to the appropriate page, though really, you're pretending to know the words while your stomach rumbles from skipping breakfast. And here comes the hymn. You don't sing loudly. Oh no, singing too enthusiastically is almost as bad as not singing at all. You must find the precise middle ground between audible reverence and humble restraint. Good luck. Today's sermon, likely something about duty, restraint, or the looming consequences of vanity. You nod along solemnly, despite not catching every word. The vicar's accent is thick and his voice has a soporific quality. Honestly, you're mostly focused on keeping your gloves clean and your eyes open. Children, if they accompany you, are expected to behave as tiny statues. No fidgeting, no whispering, no dropping hymnals. There's a special corner of Victorian hell reserved for parents whose child sneezes during the Lord's Prayer. Once the service ends, there is a quiet exodus. People file out without chatting. Eye contact is minimal. You walk home slowly, as if guilt might follow too quickly if you moved with purpose. But your work is not done. Later in the day, around 3 or 4 p.m., it's time for evening service. Yes, again, a second helping of moral correction. Some families even attend 3 services in a day. If you're thinking that sounds excessive, well, it is. But remember, this is an era where sitting silently in a pew is considered an excellent way to display virtue. Historians still argue whether this double dose of Sunday worship was more about genuine religious devotion or the fear of being seen as insufficiently reverent by neighbors. Probably a bit of both. Sabbath observance is intense. Sunday is a day of rest, but only in the most joyless. structured way imaginable. No sewing, no music, no reading of fiction, no laughter, unless it's psalm-related. Even the tea is somehow more solemn. You're not resting as much as abstaining. If you're part of a stricter sect, say, Methodists or Puritans, the rules are even tighter. Some communities would fine individuals for walking too far or playing with a dog on a Sunday. Children's toys were sometimes locked away to prevent unsanctioned merriment. Picture a 7-year-old staring longingly at a forbidden spinning top, which has now become an agent of spiritual corruption. Now, let's talk pew rentals. Yes, really, in many churches, families rented specific pews by the year, marked with little brass plaques. The closer to the front you sat, the more prestigious your position. So even in the house of God, Victorian society managed to sneak in a social hierarchy. If you're new in town or not particularly wealthy, you're in the back, literally and metaphorically. There's even gossip about whose pew is getting dusty, which may mean illness, travel, or, gasp, religious laxity. Some fringe congregations had rather eccentric practices. The Shakers, for example, believed in ecstatic dancing during worship. And then there were the Sandemanians, yes, real name, who insisted on communal foot washing and total silence except during scripture reading. Historians still debate how influential these sects were versus how much they just made the rest of Victorian England deeply uncomfortable. Back in the mainstream, church wasn't just about religion, it was the social arena. Your outfit was on display. Your children's behavior was scrutinized. Your arrival time was noted. Did you walk or ride in a carriage? Did you bow to the right people? Did you avoid sitting in the widow's pew, even by accident? For unmarried women, church could be part of a subtle courtship strategy, though obviously, no one would admit that. A well-timed glance during a hymn or a shared umbrella on the walk home could be the start of something, still incredibly repressed. After the evening service, the day winds down with quiet tea, scripture reading, and the occasional passive-aggressive comment from an elder about those who don't observe the Sabbath as they ought. That might mean you. It probably means your cousin Margaret, who once wore a pastel dress during Lent. By now, your brain is soggy with psalms and your back is sore from the pew. And yet you feel a strange sense of accomplishment, as if you've passed some invisible test. You have worshipped correctly, you have performed respectability, you have survived another Sunday. And come tomorrow, the cycle of Victorian social rules resumes, but at least you'll be allowed to read a novel again. It's Monday morning, and while your corset is once again tightening like a boa with ambition, the real squeeze comes from something far more insidious: Victorian manners. Because now that church is behind you, it's time to re-enter polite society, and that means you're stepping into the daily obstacle course of etiquette. Manners in the Victorian world are not just niceties, they are rules of survival. They dictate how you walk, where you look, when you speak, and even how long you may smile. They are the unspoken commandments of daily life. And breaking them, social suicide. Let's begin with greetings. You must not shout, hello. You do not wave. You may nod, if the person is your equal. You may curtsy, if they outrank you. If they're family, you may kiss their hand, only if you're a man. If you're a woman, you offer your hand gently and briefly, like a relic that mustn't be touched too long for fear it disintegrates into lace. Your tone must remain even, no excitement. You must modulate your voice so it's not too loud, common, nor too soft, mysterious, and therefore possibly French. You avoid slang. You avoid contractions. You refer to married women as Mrs. Husband's full name. No first names unless invited. And certainly never in public. Historians still argue whether these elaborate social niceties were designed primarily for elegance or control. Either way, they're exhausting and endlessly specific. For instance, when walking in public, a gentleman must always keep to the street side of a lady, an old rule meant to shield her from splashes and questionable glances. If a lady drops her handkerchief, a gentleman may retrieve it, but must not comment on its embroidery, or look at it too long, lest he seem impertinent. If a lady sneezes, you pretend it didn't happen. Even she pretends it didn't happen. One fringe fact: there was an entire etiquette manual devoted solely to how to hand someone a teacup without appearing forward. The proper angle of wrist rotation was diagrammed. Yes, someone published a book about that. Letters, of course, are another minefield. Every line must be composed with deliberate civility. The opening must reflect the correct relationship. "My dear sir" is appropriate for acquaintances. "Dearest Edward" would cause a scandal unless you were already betrothed or being extremely reckless with your adjectives. If you misspell a name, that's practically a duel-worthy offense. Even calling cards, the little paper rectangles you leave to announce a visit, come with a user manual. You fold the top right corner to indicate a personal call, the bottom left to show you visited in person, and you write nothing unless you're declaring a condolence. The wrong fold is worse than showing up drunk. It implies you don't know the system, and not knowing the system makes you dangerous. In conversation, small talk is the art of saying almost nothing while implying everything. You might ask after someone's health but never their health directly. It's safer to say, "I hope your household is well." If you must discuss illness, use euphemisms like "a touch of the nerves" or "a lingering complaint." Never say "flu," that's practically a swear word. You compliment someone's outfit, but only using words like "elegant" or "charming." "Lovely" might be too personal. "Pretty," "reckless," and under no circumstances do you refer to anyone's physical body, legs, ankles, shoulders, and especially not arms, unless you're describing a statue or a suit of armor. And speaking of statues, posture is paramount. You don't lean on things. You don't cross your arms. You certainly don't lounge. Every part of your body must behave with restraint. Even sneezing, coughing, or hiccuping must be disguised behind a fan, handkerchief, or well-timed fake yawn. Laughter, only if it's muted and polite. No teeth. Children are trained early in this dance. Little girls curtsy until their knees ache. Boys practice tipping their hats, opening doors, and addressing everyone as "ma'am" or "sir." A child who speaks out of turn is corrected instantly, and sometimes publicly. Childhood is a preparation for adulthood, and adulthood is a never-ending performance. There's even etiquette around silence. Long pauses are allowed, as long as they're the right kind of silence. Reflective silences are acceptable. Silent judgments are encouraged. Awkward silences, never. If you cause one, you must bridge it quickly with a neutral comment about the weather. Or better yet, a vague compliment about someone's carriage upholstery. One peculiar rule: it's considered rude to thank someone too enthusiastically. Gratitude must be tempered. Saying "thank you" more than once for the same favor implies desperation. Victorians valued stoic grace over effusive appreciation. You show you're thankful not with words, but with a discreet nod and by not tripping over your own shoelaces. Etiquette books flood the market. The Habits of Good Society, Manners for Men, Etiquette for Ladies, all guiding you through the labyrinth of behavioral correctness. These tomes detail everything from how to refuse a dance, with a cough and a distant look, to how to exit a room, backwards. If royalty is present, one of the more bizarre customs, you must never speak to someone of higher rank unless they speak to you first. This is known as not taking a liberty. If you're walking through a park and see your cousin, who is now married to a minor baronet, you must pretend you didn't. She might acknowledge you, but unless she does, you nod only internally and move on. And yet, beneath all this formality lies an odd kind of freedom. Within the constraints, you always know where you stand. You may not be happy, but you are correct. And in the Victorian world, correctness is next to cleanliness, which, as we've covered, is next to godliness, lavender water, and furniture shame. So you straighten your spine, rehearse your curtsy, and practice your best "I am definitely not tired of this" smile. Every gesture matters. Every word has weight. You are walking through a minefield of manners, and the only way to survive is to treat it like a dance. A very slow, very quiet, extremely judgmental dance. It starts with a knock. Not a loud one. Of course, just a gentle, respectful tap-tap at the front door. A black boarded envelope is handed over. And instantly, the mood in the house changes. Someone has died. Now begins a whole new choreography of social rules, because in the Victorian era, death isn't the end of etiquette. It's just the start of a new, black-clad phase where you are expected to mourn, beautifully, properly, and for as long as society deems appropriate. First, mourning attire. You will wear black, not just any black, either. Deep mourning black. Shiny fabrics like satin are forbidden. You must choose matte textures like crepe, which somehow manage to look both expensive and tragic. If the deceased was your husband, you're in black for 2 full years. If it was a cousin, maybe 6 months. Historians still argue whether these durations reflect genuine grief or a highly codified fashion industry with a flair for emotional accounting. Men, by contrast, mourn with far less drama. A black armband, a somber tie, and maybe a top hat with a black band will suffice. It's one of the only times Victorian women are expected to go bigger than men. Widow's weeds, they're called, entire outfits of shadowy fabric, complete with heavy veils to obscure your face. You're supposed to look like sadness incarnate. You cannot wear jewelry, unless it contains the deceased's hair. Yes, hair jewelry is all the rage. Delicately woven braids of your loved one's locks, turned into brooches, rings, even lockets. A fringe tidbit, some families commission entire wreaths made from hair, framed and hung on the wall like a very sentimental tumbleweed. Next comes the funeral itself. It's not just a ceremony, it's a performance. Mourning carriages roll slowly through the streets, pulled by black horses in black feathered headdresses. You, as a mourner, must sit perfectly still, expression composed, no tears unless they're dainty. Loud sobbing is considered tasteless, and under no circumstances should you faint near the casket. It's dramatic. Yes, but deeply inconvenient for the undertaker. Post-funeral etiquette kicks in immediately. Calling cards are replaced with condolence cards, also boarded in black. Visitors are allowed, but only the right kind. You're not meant to host lavish teas, of course. No music, no dancing, no laughter, for at least a few weeks, or, if your spouse died, months. Your house must echo the same silence as your heart. Victorians also maintain strict expectations about the length of mourning. Every relationship has its assigned duration. Spouse, 2 years. Parent, 1 year. Child, a year, maybe more. Sibling, 6 months. Second cousin twice removed. Honestly, you could get away with 2 weeks of polite frowning and slightly quieter footsteps. And yet, even grief becomes performative. There's competition to be the most devastated. Families might argue over veil lengths. One widow might feel upstaged by another's embroidered handkerchief. Some take to mourning walks in cemeteries, parading sorrowfully beneath willow trees as though auditioning for a Gothic novel. Here's where things get particularly unusual. Victorians don't just mourn the dead, they visit them. Cemeteries like Highgate or Kensal Green become fashionable gathering spots. You bring a picnic, sit on a bench, and enjoy a leisurely afternoon next to Aunt Millicent's monument. Children play nearby. You might even spot a flirtation or two behind the tombstones, of course. And what's more, the dead are watching, at least symbolically. Portraits of the departed are kept in the parlor. Sometimes, you even have one taken after death. Yes, post-mortem photography was not only real, but wildly popular. The deceased is propped up in a chair, sometimes with painted eyes on their eyelids, sometimes with the family gathered around as if nothing unusual is happening. The goal, to capture one last likeness for the mantelpiece. Open debate remains among historians about whether this was an extension of grief, a form of remembrance, or simply the inevitable result of slow shutter speeds and high mortality rates. And the rituals continue at home. Mirrors are draped with black cloth, because Victorians believe the soul might get confused, or worse, trapped, by its reflection. Clocks are stopped at the time of death. Some households even cover keyholes with paper to prevent spirits from slipping through. Yes, seriously, it's like paranormal pest control. Then there's the matter of the will. Reading it is another social event, often held in private but discussed with great public interest. Who inherited the silver? What happened to the cottage in Bath? If there's drama, it must remain beneath the surface. Open resentment is frowned upon, except in fiction, where it's positively encouraged. Grief has a timeline, but also a graduation process. After deep mourning comes half mourning, during which you may begin introducing muted colors, gray, lavender, perhaps even navy, into your wardrobe. A scandalous amount of freedom. Really, you're expected to signal this transition subtly: a lighter shawl, a less oppressive veil, a slightly perkier bonnet feather. And once the mourning period ends, you're not expected to dwell, especially if you're a woman. In fact, if your husband has been dead more than 2 years and you haven't remarried, people start whispering that perhaps you enjoyed widowhood a little too much. Children, too, are taught mourning rituals from a young age. Black ribbons tied into their hair, tiny mourning suits, funerals attended in stiff silence. Grief is not just personal, it's educational. Of course, not everyone obeys these rules. Some push back quietly, opting for subdued color instead of full black, or trimming their mourning period short due to poverty, practicality, or just emotional rebellion. But even that quiet defiance must be wrapped in layers of decorum. You might say, "The mourning is in my heart," which is Victorian code for, "I'm not doing this, but I dare you to challenge me." So here you sit, sipping weak tea in your crepe shawl, a lock of hair clasped to your chest, and a black ribbon tied around your calling card box. You mourn as prescribed, not too loudly, not too briefly, and certainly not without the correct stationery. Because even in death, appearances must be preserved, rules must be followed, and the grieving must look, well, beautifully broken. You're 5 years old, and your playtime is over before it even begins. Because in Victorian society, childhood isn't some whimsical, sugar-dusted age of tree climbing and giggling over frogs in your pocket. No, it's preparation, grueling, fidgety preparation for adult life. You are a small adult in training, wrapped in scratchy formality and corrected every time your ankle shows or your Latin conjugation wobbles. If you're lucky enough to be born into an upper or middle-class family, your morning starts with a governess. Not a fun nanny or a cuddly tutor, a governess. Stern, underpaid, and determined to instill in you the kind of discipline that would make a Swiss boarding school seem like a beach holiday. You sit straight, you don't fidget, you speak when spoken to, and even then, in full sentences with subject-verb agreement. You begin your day with elocution, because saying "ain't" could doom your marriage prospects in 20 years. Then there's French, Latin, arithmetic, penmanship, embroidery, if you're a girl, and moral philosophy. It's like a liberal arts college compressed into a nursery. And recess, if it exists, it's a brisk, supervised walk around the garden, no rolling, no shouting, and definitely no unladylike tree climbing. Historians still argue whether this intense early education produced a uniquely resilient generation or simply gave rise to generations of quietly traumatized adults who flinched every time they heard the word tutor. What's that you say? You want to play with toys? That depends. Girls get dolls, porcelain-faced, delicately dressed, and designed to train you in baby rearing long before your body has a clue what's coming. Boys get miniature weapons, hobby horses, or toy soldiers, small empires to conquer from the comfort of the nursery rug. Even the furniture disciplines you. Chairs are upright, beds are narrow, there are no plush beanbags or chaos-friendly blankets. Your space is tidy, symmetrical, and overseen by portraits of long-dead relatives who are almost certainly judging your posture. And heaven help you if you're poor. For working-class children, childhood is not a phase, it's a liability. You're either a miniature worker or a future burden. Chimney sweeps, match girls, factory assistants, You rise before dawn, soot up your nose, muscles straining, and one wrong move means injury or worse. One quirky tidbit: some chimney sweeps were so small they were referred to as climbing boys, and they were often recruited from orphanages. Employers justified it by saying, "They're light and nimble," which is Victorian for, "They won't sue us when they get stuck in a flue." If you're lucky, you go to a ragged school, charity institutions meant to educate the destitute. There, you learn the 3 R's: reading, writing, and religious guilt. That last one is particularly emphasized. You're reminded daily that poverty is probably the result of moral failing. Or maybe your parents just didn't try hard enough to be born upper class. For all children, rich or poor, rules govern your speech, your dress, your posture, even your emotions. Crying in public, tolerated briefly if you scraped a knee, but only if it's a dainty cry. Full-on sobbing earns you a stern "compose yourself." Laughter, better be quiet. Giggling uncontrollably is the fast track to being labeled nervous or, worse, unrefined. Let's not forget church. Even toddlers attend, dressed like miniature vicars and duchesses, expected to sit motionless through sermons long enough to wilt houseplants. Fidgeting earns you a look, whispering, a pinch, falling asleep, a tap on the shoulder with a gloved hand, and a reminder that eternal damnation is not a suitable nap topic. Birthdays are not balloon and cake affairs either. You might receive a new book of moral stories, or a new set of gloves, or if you're very lucky, a wooden puzzle depicting the British Empire. Because nothing says fun like puzzling out colonialism before you've lost your baby teeth. And yet, there are moments of joy, brief. Blink and you'll miss them. Windows where you find delight in things like snow falling on cobblestones or the muffled thump of a hoop and stick game in the lane. You whisper secrets to your doll, or arrange your books by size, or press your nose to the frosty window and imagine a world without etiquette manuals. But those moments are rare, because your life is a training ground, and expectations fall fast and hard. Boys must grow into men who can quote Cicero and ignore their emotions. Girls must become women who can embroider a pillowcase while suppressing personal ambition. Independence is suspicious. Whimsy is discouraged. Even mealtimes are educational. You are taught not to reach, not to slouch, not to ask for more. You must use the correct cutlery, unfold your napkin just so, and chew quietly. Slurping is a hanging offense. Socially, at least, you learn to curtsy or bow before you can tie your shoes. You learn to speak of death in hushed, reverent tones, and to write thank you notes for things you didn't want. You memorize poems by Tennyson, hymns by Wesley, and the entire hierarchy of the royal family. Not because you need to, but because one day, someone might ask you at tea. And at night, you're put to bed early, with a candle, a warning about fire hazards, and a book of improving literature. Improving, by the way, means depressing. Tales where naughty children meet untimely ends and virtue is rewarded with emotional constipation. There's no bedtime story about dragons or space adventures. Just a reminder that virtue is silent, obedience is golden, and you should never question why your governess eats separately in the kitchen. Still, deep inside that stiff collar and behind those polished boots, you wonder what it would feel like to run barefoot through grass. To shout, to laugh without covering your mouth, to ask, why, and not be punished for curiosity. Because under all the rules, you're still a child, dreaming, squirming, learning, even if the world around you insists you do it in complete silence. You're older now, maybe not old, exactly, but old enough to sense that the seams of this stitched-up society are starting to fray. For years, you've tiptoed through every Victorian rule imaginable. You survived lace collars, gendered teaspoons, judgmental clergy, and possibly 14 consecutive funerals. But something has shifted. There's a strange restlessness in the air, like a corset string pulled one tug too tight. It starts quietly. A woman, scandalously alone, rides a bicycle down the lane, her skirts slightly raised to avoid the spokes. You stare, slack-jawed, Bloomers. She's wearing actual bloomers. You feel like you're witnessing a scandal and a miracle rolled into one pair of puffed pantaloons. Not long after that, someone you know, perhaps a niece, or an adventurous cousin, says she's going to college. A woman, in a university, studying things other than needlepoint or passive endurance. And the strangest part, no one faints, not even Aunt Geraldine, who once swooned because someone used the word trousers at tea. Historians still argue whether these shifts happened in response to technology, philosophy, or sheer exhaustion, but no one doubts that change was creeping in like fog through a cracked window. The drawing rooms still exist, but they're a little louder now, a little looser. Someone dares to laugh from the diaphragm. Someone else mentions socialism. Somewhere, a monocle falls into a brandy glass. Even fashion changes. Corsets begin to soften, skirts narrow, fabrics get lighter. You're still laced up like a roast on Sunday, but at least now, you can breathe between courses. And then, one of the young women in your circle cuts her hair short. Just lops it off, chin level, like Joan of Arc in a haberdashery. The elders clutch their pearls. You secretly think she looks magnificent. Men are loosening up, too. Top hats aren't as tall. Mustaches get flamboyant. One gentleman you know even trades his waistcoat for, gasp, a knitted sweater. The kind you might wear while thinking about poetry and not colonization. Even the children have more play in them now. Less Latin, more laughter, less embroidery, more curiosity. You watch them chase one another through the park and realize, with a strange ache, that they'll never quite understand the rules you live by. Not all of them, anyway, and maybe that's okay. Of course, not everything changes. There are still calling cards. There are still scandalous whispers behind fans. The Queen is still the Queen. At least for now, and she still disapproves of most things. But the cracks are showing. And in those cracks, sunlight. It comes with noise. The distant rumble of factory chimneys. The clatter of trams. The rustle of suffragette banners being unrolled in back rooms lit by gaslight and resolve. One quirky tidbit. Some suffragettes used jujitsu for self-defense. Can you imagine that? You, dodging a calling card while Gertrude from number 12 throws a shoulder block at a policeman. It's absurd. It's glorious. And then there are the novels. The dangerous ones. You read them by candlelight. Eyes darting to the door. There's Jane Eyre, daring to want something more. Middlemarch, filled with brains and disappointment. And Dracula, which makes you wonder if bats are just misunderstood introverts. You start to question things. Why must grief be worn in black for 2 years? Why must women always be accompanied? Why must love be whispered and never shouted? The rules begin to feel brittle. You speak a little louder, laugh a little longer. You start calling your mother, Ma, instead of mother. And though she tuts, you see the corners of her mouth twitch upward. At some point, someone plays music on a gramophone. And it's not a hymn. It's ragtime, a melody with hips. You sway slightly in your chair and don't apologize. And yes, there are those who cling to the old ways. Like ivy gripping crumbling stone. But more and more, you see hands peeling back the curtains. You see ankles. You see possibility. Even your furniture gets comfier. Armchairs no longer resemble medieval torture devices. Cushions abound. There's talk of an electric kettle. You've lived by the book for so long. You can quote the rules in your sleep. But now, you wonder what might happen if you skipped a page. Or wrote your own. Change is slow. It doesn't burst in like a scandal. It sneaks in like a blush. But one morning, you walk down the street without a chaperone. And the sky doesn't fall. The Queen doesn't personally smite you. You just feel the breeze on your face. And it feels like freedom. Victorian society is still standing. But it wobbles. And in that wobble, there is space for new voices, new rules, and the sweet, terrifying idea that maybe, just maybe, you don't need a calling card to be seen.